Hello, everybody. I hope you're all safe, well, and healthy. I'm very honored to be presenting for all of you, despite the weird format and odd circumstances. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and get into it. My presentation is on Akira Kurosawa's film, The Bad Sleep Well, as an adaptation of Shakespeare's Hamlet, and viewing both the play and the film through a Marxist lens, which I feel Kurosawa's film encourages us to do. Shakespeare's Hamlet has been adapted to film more than any other Shakespeare play. Most of these film adaptations, like the Laurence Olivier, Kenneth Branagh, and Franco Zeffirelli versions, maintain the original setting of the play and use cinematic techniques to highlight the story's emotional content. Even adaptations that replace the original setting, like The Lion King or the Michael Almereyda version, still focus primarily on the distress of the titular character. One Hamlet adaptation that stands out from these is Akira Kurosawa's The Bad Sleep Well. In this version, the state government of Denmark is replaced with the corporate business sector of Japan. The film's primary concern is with the dealings of the public corporation and how Koichi Nishi, the film's prince, reacts to them. After his father is forced to commit suicide by a corrupt bureaucratic structure, Koichi climbs the ladder of the company's hierarchy in an attempt to disrupt it from the inside. This setting change and emphasis on the practices of Japan's corporate world are ideal for reading both the film and play through a Marxist lens. Although Shakespeare's work is not generally seen in Marxist terms, most likely because of its historical precedents, obviously Marxism didn't exist when Shakespeare was writing Hamlet or any of his other plays, Kurosawa's film forces the relationship between Shakespeare and Marxism to become unavoidable and encourages us to reapproach Hamlet this way. Through the characterization of Claudius and the prince, Shakespeare displays an empathy for the working class and aversion to corruption in the original play. This characterization is then amplified in The Bad Sleep Well through the portrayal of Koichi and Iwabuchi, turning Shakespeare's power analysis into a structural critique of the capitalist system. Shakespeare shows us the failures of hegemony with the character of King Claudius. Claudius's poor leadership is evident through his unpopularity with the citizenry, as evidenced by Marcellus referring to his rotten state of Denmark, and the following lines, quote, "He's loved of the distracted multitude, who like not in their judgment, but their eyes." In this dialogue, Claudius refers to Hamlet being well-liked among the people of Denmark. This in turn implies that the king is not well-liked. He displays his envy of the fact that Hamlet is more popular among the people than he is. However, it's easy to see why the people of Denmark feel this way. He says that they will judge based on the appearance in their eyes and not their rational judgment. This illustrates that he does not have respect for the people he rules over and views them exploitatively through a top-down lens of bourgeoisie to proletariat. He is so engrossed in maintaining his power and status that he can only see people as human capital through their power relations. This process of commodification is further evidenced by Claudius's marriage to Gertrude and is embodied in the quote, "My crown, mine own ambition, and my queen," end quote. Here, by mentioning his queen as the last in a list of his crown and ambition, he is equating the three, and the emphasis on my and mine imply possessive ownership through an assertion of power. To Claudius, Gertrude is just another piece of the prize that comes from being king. Although it is true that he sees her as, quote, "conjunctive to my life and soul," end quote, his love for her is not as Gertrude the woman, it is as Gertrude the facet of kingship. Literary critic Elhem Omrani supports this analysis. Quote, "For him, all things and all people are commodities. Claudius commodified Gertrude and married her in order to help him win the throne away from Hamlet after the death of the previous king and strengthen the bases of his newly established kingdom. The subsumption of Claudius's humanity by the nature of his social position shows Shakespeare's view of power was adjacent to the Marxist critique." The vice president of public corporation, Iwabuchi, is the Bad Sleep Well's version of King Claudius. By taking Claudius's traits of commodification and hegemonic incompetence and placing them in the corporation's vice president, it highlights how these characteristics flourish in a capitalist structure. Much like Claudius's rule making Denmark rotten, public corporation does not benefit the people of Japan, and Iwabuchi is an unpopular figure in Japanese society. This is made clear through the relationship Iwabuchi and public corporation have with the press. We see news headlines like, "Do suicides prove corruption?" and "Underlings sacrifice themselves to contain scandal." After Iwabuchi refutes a journalist's claim that the suicides are cover-ups for the company's corruption, another reporter retorts by saying, quote, "You think so? The public isn't so sure," end quote. The press see through Iwabuchi's incompetent lies and the Japanese public distrust of public corporation the same way the people of Denmark distrust Claudius's state. The vice president also commodifies his daughter, much like how Claudius commodifies Gertrude. This is exemplified when he drugs her with a hallucinogenic to trick her into telling him where Koichi is hiding. After convincing her to, quote, drink it all quickly, end quote, he steps out into the hallway and paces back and forth in front of a mirror with his head down. When he finally looks up at the mirror, he dons a look of disgust and covers his face with his handkerchief. By his facial expression and the fact that he feels the need to literally cover it, it shows that he is appalled at what he sees. He knows that by doing this, he has lost all trace of his humanity. He has this moment of self-recognition that he is so engrossed in the world of churning out profits for public corporation that endangering and betraying the trust of his daughter are secondary. The transactional nature of Iwabuchi is necessary for a capitalist economy to thrive, and public distrust of incompetent rulers is a symptom of that system's failures. Mark Fisher comments on how these traits are a necessity in capitalist realism. He writes that, quote, good management can only be maintained if one has a near total absence of any critical reflexivity, end quote. By transposing elements of Claudius's character into Iwabuchi, this film magnifies how those traits serve and function a modern capitalist system. Hamlet serves as a foil to Claudius in this way, for he is aware of Claudius's inept ruling, and he has the ability to forge meaningful human relationships. The prince slanders Claudius as, quote, a king of shreds and patches, end quote, and further denounces him in the lines behind me. This boisterous attack on the king shows us that Hamlet has insight into the king's motivations. The use of the words tithe, vice, and cutpurse all have connotations of monetary gain. Hamlet is perhaps the only character in the play who correctly attributes the king's primary motivation as the maintenance of his power. Unlike Claudius, Hamlet displays an empathy for the working class, evidenced in the line, quote, then are our beggars bodies, and our monarchs and outstretched heroes the beggars' shadows, end quote. Here, he recognizes that both he and the beggars don't see the king as fit to rule. He also recognizes the importance of the popular support of the beggar class, notably a support Claudius wishes he had. In contrast to the view of people as commodities, Hamlet forges a true friendship with Horatio. Hamlet speaks of this in the line behind me. By making specific reference to his choice, Hamlet proves that his friendship with Horatio is genuine and is not bound by any transactional purpose. The elevation of Hamlet's humanity and his recognition of class consciousness, in contrast to Claudius, shows Shakespeare rejecting the notion that there is no alternative to capitalist realism. Much like how Hamlet accurately ascribes the king's motivations to him, the Bad Sleep Wells Koichi is the only character who is willing to look public corporation in the eye and critique their social position. Koichi refers to public corporations' inner workings as a, quote, snake pit, end quote, and confronts Moriyama after he kidnaps him from the company. The speech he gives in this scene is parallel to Hamlet's tirade on Claudius to his mother. The use of position implies that Moriyama's corruption is tied to his role as a member of the managerial boss class. By referring to Moriyama's self-denial, Koichi implicates that the betrayal of one's humanity is necessary to hold this position. Also similar to the prince and Horatio, Koichi has a genuine friendship with Itakura. Michael Almereyda calls Itakura Koichi's, quote, Horatio-like pal, end quote. There's a scene where they lament the death of their old industrial jobs and talk about how they used to haul oil during the war period. During this scene, they have the comedic exchange presented in this slide. The humor of this scene creates a stark dichotomy between their former labor and the cold, lifeless inhumanity we see in the corporate sector, where the lives of the people you work with are expendable. In taking Hamlet's humanity and placing it against the backdrop of corporate capitalism, Kurosawa makes a much more direct link between power imbalances and their intrinsic role in an exploitative economic system. In adapting Hamlet into a world of corporate bureaucracy, Kurosawa is able to turn Shakespeare's hints of a Marxist critique into a film with a systemic anti-capitalist worldview. While Shakespeare touches on power imbalances, commodification, and class consciousness through Claudius and the titular character, Kurosawa transposes these elements into a structural analysis. The final scene of the film depicts Iwabuchi on the phone with public corporation's nameless and faceless president, who is hatching a plot to force Iwabuchi to suicide next. Kurosawa, quote, invokes the shadowy, centerless impersonality proper to a corporate and, quote, capitalist structure in portraying, quote, the system itself that Iwabuchi is talking to on the phone, end quote. And Kurosawa's film, the cyclical wheels of capital will keep turning regardless of the individual they possess next.